There are lots of urban legends in Jerusalem. This one might be the most important. It has to do with the Golden Gate and the fact that it is closed.
For centuries, one gate in Jerusalem has stood in silent defiance of time, its stones sealed, its arches locked away from the footsteps of pilgrims and kings alike. Known to some as the Eastern Gate, to others as the Golden Gate, it faces directly toward the Mount of Olives, where prophecy whispers of the day the Messiah will return. Now, startling new clues may finally reveal why this gate was sealed in the first place, and what its mysterious closure could mean for the future of Jerusalem. Could the key to this ancient mystery unlock one of the most powerful prophecies? On the eastern wall of the Old City, there stands a structure both majestic and puzzling. The Eastern Gate, with its twin arches and thick stone walls, is not like the other gates of Jerusalem. Most gates are open, bustling with merchants, tourists, and locals moving through their archways daily. But this one has been bricked up solid for nearly half a millennium, as if frozen in time. Known in Hebrew as Sha'ar HaRachamim, the Gate of Mercy, it is steeped in religious meaning. For Christians, it is the very gate through which Jesus entered the city on Palm Sunday, fulfilling Zechariah's prophecy that the king would come gentle and riding on a donkey. For Jews, it is tied to the arrival of the Messiah, who will come from the east and pass through it to establish his reign. For Muslims, it is part of the Haram al-Sharif, the revered compound housing the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Its position is more than symbolic, it is strategic. Facing directly toward the Mount of Olives, it aligns perfectly with biblical prophecies about the coming of the Lord. The book of Ezekiel paints a vivid picture in chapter 44. This gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened, and no man shall enter by it, because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered by it. The words are so specific that many believe this very gate is the one Ezekiel saw in his vision. But the mystery deepens when we realize that the gate was not sealed in ancient biblical times. It remained open for centuries after the time of Jesus. So why then, in the middle of the 16th century, did a powerful ruler order it to be sealed permanently? Was it a simple act of architecture, or a calculated move to interfere with prophecy itself? To uncover the truth, we must dig into a time when Jerusalem was under the rule of one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known. The Eastern Gate is not just stone and mortar. It is a living symbol of hope, fear, and destiny. Over the centuries, countless legends have swirled around it. Jewish tradition holds that the Shekinah, the very presence of God, once passed through this gate into the temple. Some rabbis have taught that the divine glory will return through the same path when the Messiah comes. For Christians, the gate carries deep New Testament significance. The Gospels recount how Jesus approached Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, entering the city to the shouts of Hosanna. It is widely believed that his path took him directly through the Eastern Gate, fulfilling ancient prophecies from Zechariah and the Psalms. The book of Acts adds another layer. After his resurrection, Jesus ascended from the Mount of Olives with the promise that he would return in like manner. For Muslims, the gate holds a different but equally weighty meaning. Some Islamic traditions connect the site to future events involving the Day of Judgment. This shared sense of spiritual importance across religions has made the gate not just a physical barrier, but a symbol of ultimate destiny. Its sealing, therefore, is not seen as random. In the eyes of the faithful, the closed arches represent a divine timetable, that the gate will remain shut until the appointed day when the true king comes. This is why the gate has fascinated generations of pilgrims, scholars, and prophecy watchers. It is not merely a piece of ancient architecture, it is, to many, a lock on the door of history itself. The power of this wall lies not in its height or thickness, but in what it represents, the waiting period between God's promises and their fulfillment. And waiting has always been a test of faith. As Psalm 24 says, "Lift up your heads, O you gates, and the King of glory shall come in." The sealing of the Eastern Gate has made that verse more than poetry. It has turned it into a countdown. To understand why the Eastern Gate was sealed, we must travel back to the year 1541. Jerusalem was under the control of the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a ruler whose power stretched across continents, from Eastern Europe to the Arabian Peninsula. Suleiman was not just a military leader, he was a man deeply aware of the religious currents running through the city he ruled. He knew the Jewish prophecies that the Messiah would come through the Eastern Gate. Whether he believed them or not, he took them seriously enough to act. Historical accounts suggest that Suleiman ordered the gate sealed to prevent the fulfillment of these prophecies. In his eyes, a closed gate meant no Messiah could enter, and therefore no political or spiritual upheaval could threaten his empire's control over Jerusalem. It was a bold act, an attempt to outmaneuver God's plans by human hands. But the sealing was not his only measure. To strengthen the barrier, Suleiman ordered a Muslim cemetery to be built directly in front of the gate. He knew that, according to Jewish law, priests, or Kohanim, could not pass through a cemetery without becoming ritually unclean. Since the Messiah in Jewish tradition would be of priestly lineage, the cemetery was intended to be an impenetrable spiritual barrier. This dual defense, stone and graves, was meant to lock the gate for eternity. Yet in doing so, Suleiman may have unwittingly fulfilled the very prophecy he hoped to block. For Ezekiel's words declared that the gate would be shut and remain so until the prince himself came to open it. Suleiman's efforts may have been less an act of prevention and more a step in the unfolding of God's perfect plan. The Ottomans, after sealing the Eastern Gate, took an additional step that speaks volumes about their understanding, however misguided, of Jewish and Christian prophecy. They ordered the creation of a Muslim cemetery directly in front of the gate. Layer upon layer of graves spread across the Kidron Valley's slope, forming a deliberate barrier between the outside world and the sealed entrance. Their reasoning was rooted in both superstition and strategy. According to Jewish priestly law, a Kohen, a descendant of Aaron, must avoid contact with the dead to remain ceremonially clean. By placing a burial ground before the gate, the Ottomans believed they could prevent the arrival of the prophesied Messiah, whom they assumed would be a priestly figure. It was as if they thought human hands could halt the march of heaven's timetable, but history is filled with examples of earthly rulers trying to contain what God has decreed, and failing. The cemetery stands today, weathered by centuries, yet it has not diminished the promise written in the book of Ezekiel. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. If the Creator could part the Red Sea and roll away the stone from the tomb, what is a gate or a field of graves to him? Still, the cemetery became a symbol, a testament to the lengths men will go to block divine prophecy. For centuries, pilgrims stood on the Mount of Olives, looking across the valley at that locked gate, wondering when and how it would open. The quiet rows of gravestones seemed to whisper of defiance against God, and yet, paradoxically, they also reminded believers of the exactness of prophecy. Every attempt to seal the promise only made its eventual fulfillment more certain. The scene today is eerily still. Ancient olive trees sway in the breeze, stones mark the resting places of the dead, and beyond them, the Eastern Gate waits, its stones unyielding, yet not untouched by time. Which raises the question, could the very barrier meant to keep him out become the stage for his grand entrance? The Eastern Gate is not just a physical structure, it is a prophetic signpost embedded in the tapestry of Scripture. From the prophet Ezekiel's vision to the psalmist's songs, the Eastern entrance has been a focal point of divine movement. In Ezekiel 44:1-3, the prophet writes, "Then the man brought me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, the one facing east, and it was shut. The Lord said to me, 'This gate is to remain shut. It must not be opened, no one may enter through it. It is to remain shut because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it.'" Here lies the paradox. God himself had once entered through this gate, and now, by his decree, it was to remain shut until the appointed time. This was not a random closure, but a sacred pause in history. Psalm 24 also points toward the mystery. "Lift up your heads, O gates, be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." These verses, often sung and recited, carry a prophetic echo that believers through the ages have tied to the Eastern Gate. The King of Glory entering his city. What moment could be more climactic in human history? The prophets Zechariah and Isaiah deepen the picture, foretelling a time when the Messiah will stand upon the Mount of Olives, splitting it in two, and enter Jerusalem in triumph. When read together, these passages form a map, one that leads straight to the sealed entrance. For those who believe, the gate's closure is not a sign of defeat, but of certainty. It is shut now because the story is still unfolding. The sealing becomes a safeguard, ensuring that when the moment comes, no one will doubt that it was God who opened the way. As we look upon its weathered stones, we are reminded that prophecy is not bound by centuries. Time, for the author of history, is but a page to turn. And when that page turns, the Eastern Gate will bear witness to an event the world has long awaited. When Jesus walked the dusty roads of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, he would have passed by the Eastern Gate. In his final week, he entered the city, very likely through this very gate, riding on a donkey, fulfilling the words of Zechariah 9:9. "See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey." From the Mount of Olives, he would have seen the gate's ancient stones gleaming in the sun, the temple rising beyond it, and the crowds shouting, "Hosanna!" But he also saw what they could not: the coming destruction of the city, the scattering of its people, and the centuries when that gate would stand in silence. To the Messiah, the Eastern Gate was not just an entrance, it was a symbol of his mission. It was the path of his first coming, in humility, and the prophesied path of his second coming, in glory. In Matthew 23:39 he said, "You will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" That promise has echoed across the ages. The gate's sealing becomes, in this light, a temporary pause before the final act. It stands closed not because man has triumphed over prophecy, but because the appointed moment has not yet arrived. Even now, the Mount of Olives faces the gate, ready for the day when his feet will once again touch its slopes. On that day, no wall, no tomb, no earthly decree will hold back the King. The gate will open, not with the force of human tools, but at the command of the one who is the door himself. For believers, imagining the Messiah's return through that very entrance is not a fanciful dream. It is the heartbeat of hope. And perhaps, as the gate quietly waits, its silence is not emptiness, but anticipation. It began as a small whisper among local residents, the kind of thing one might dismiss as rumor. But then, images began to surface, grainy yet unmistakable. The ancient Eastern Gate, sealed for nearly 5 centuries, appeared to have developed a visible crack along its weathered stones. Some said it was merely the result of time and erosion, the natural toll on any structure so old. Yet for others, particularly those familiar with the biblical prophecies concerning this gate, it was no coincidence. Jerusalem's Eastern Gate, also called the Golden Gate, is more than just an old wall. According to the prophet Ezekiel, it is the very portal through which the glory of the Lord once entered and through which he will return. In Ezekiel 44:1-3, the prophet describes a gate facing east that is shut, reserved for the coming of the prince. For centuries, this prophecy has been tied directly to the Messiah's return. When the crack appeared, it was enough to reignite centuries-old debates. Could this be the first sign that the seal is weakening? Could it be that God himself is beginning to set in motion what he spoke through the prophets? On social media, believers from around the world began sharing the images with captions drawn from Scripture. Some cited Matthew 24:33. "When you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door." Others recalled Zechariah 14, which foretells the Lord's feet standing on the Mount of Olives, directly across from the gate. The authorities, meanwhile, issued no official statement of concern. To them, it was likely just a structural issue. But to those with eyes of faith, it felt like a trumpet blast, a small yet resounding reminder that the King is coming. And if the gate is indeed beginning to give way, the question arises: are we ready for what happens next? Once word of the crack reached the archaeological community, it was inevitable that professionals would be drawn to investigate. Jerusalem is, after all, one of the most studied cities in the world, and the Eastern Gate is one of its most enigmatic landmarks. Teams equipped with cameras, drones, and advanced imaging technology approach the area cautiously. The gate itself lies within the protective walls of the old city, its stones layered with centuries of history. Built over earlier structures dating back to the Byzantine and even the Second Temple periods, it carries within its foundations a timeline of Jerusalem itself. The challenge for archaeologists is that much of the gate is off-limits due to its location and the Muslim cemetery directly in front of it. a deliberate measure by the Ottoman Sultan in the 16th century to deter any would-be Messiah from entering, since Jewish tradition forbids priests from passing through burial grounds. The crack, though small, offered a rare opportunity to study the material integrity of the wall. Was it due to shifting foundations, weathering, or perhaps movement in the bedrock beneath? Some archaeologists noted that recent seismic activity in the region could have contributed to the shift. Yet for others, especially those familiar with biblical archaeology, there was an unspoken awareness that their work was not merely about stones and mortar. If Ezekiel's vision is to be taken literally, the gate's opening is tied not to random events, but to divine timing. As one researcher quietly remarked to a colleague, this may be less about what we can measure and more about what we can't. With every scan and photograph, the tension grew. For the scientists, the crack was a puzzle of history. For the faithful, it was a sign of destiny unfolding. And somewhere between those two worlds, the truth waits to be revealed. As soon as news of the crack broke, theories began flooding in. Some were grounded in archaeology, others in theology, and still others in pure speculation. Among the secular voices, the most common explanation was structural decay, a natural result of centuries of weather exposure. However, biblical scholars saw the event differently. Many pointed to the convergence of world events, the increasing unrest in the Middle East, shifting alliances, and global calls for peace in Jerusalem, as a prophetic backdrop for the gate's sudden vulnerability. Could this be a prelude to the events of Ezekiel 38-39, where nations gather against Israel before the Lord intervenes? Another theory suggested that the crack might be symbolic, a spiritual warning shot meant to awaken the world before the actual moment of the Messiah's arrival. In Jewish tradition, the opening of the Eastern Gate is intimately connected to the coming of the Mashiach. In Christian understanding, it aligns with the return of Christ in glory. There were even whispers of supernatural involvement. Some believers claim to have dreamt of the gate opening, accompanied by visions of light flooding through. Others recounted personal encounters with the verse from Psalm 24:7. "Lift up your heads, you gates, be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." Of course, skeptics dismissed such interpretations as fanciful. To them, the crack was nothing more than evidence of poor maintenance. But the more these debates spread, the more people began to revisit the ancient texts for themselves. And that, perhaps, was the most profound shift. Regardless of whether the crack was divine or natural, it had turned the world's eyes back to the scriptures. Whether one sees the crack in the Eastern Gate as a prophetic sign or a geological inevitability, its impact on the conversation about Jerusalem's future is undeniable. For the faithful, it serves as a tangible reminder that prophecy is not merely a relic of the past, but a living reality moving toward fulfillment. The scriptures are filled with warnings and promises about the days ahead. Jesus himself spoke in Matthew 24 of watching for the signs of his coming, comparing them to the budding of a fig tree, subtle yet certain indicators that the season has changed. The Eastern Gate, standing directly opposite the Mount of Olives, is a central stage in that unfolding drama. In a time when the world is distracted by political upheaval, economic uncertainty, and cultural division, a crack in an ancient gate may seem insignificant. But for those who understand its prophetic weight, it is anything but small. It is a signal that the timeline of God is not forgotten. Perhaps the most sobering aspect is the question of readiness. If indeed the king will one day enter through that gate, then the real preparation is not in shoring up its stones, but in preparing the hearts of people. As Isaiah 43 declares, "Prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God." The gate may open slowly or suddenly, through human intervention or divine power. But one truth remains unshakable. When it does, the world will never be the same. The Eastern Gate has stood in silence for centuries, yet now its stillness is being questioned. Is the crack a whisper from eternity, reminding us that prophecy marches forward? Share your thoughts below, subscribe for more revelations, and let us keep watch, because the moment could be closer than we think.